Hi, Choden.
Hi there, good to see you.
So welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to have a conversation with me. Um, and I think I'd like to just start by getting to know you a little bit. So, could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about who you are and where you come from?
I'm a Tibetan Buddhist monk based at Samye Ling, which is a Buddhist monastery in southern Scotland. And I have been a monk for the last 5 years and been involved in the Tibetan tradition a long time. And originally, I come from South Africa and I qualified as a lawyer there and did not pursue that career, but found myself instead embarked on a path of practice and training in Tibetan Buddhism.
So that's a big change, right? Going from a lawyer to
Yeah.
a Buddhist monk. What took you in that direction?
I think I was always very interested in the mind, and I was very interested in the cause of my own suffering and the suffering of people around me. So I think law was something that I was conditioned to do. Maybe my father wanted to be a lawyer and didn't, so I ended up living out his kind of dream. But when I was studying law, I met somebody called Rob Nairn, who was a professor of criminology. And he was, at that time, he had started a Buddhist center in South Africa. And I went to some teachings on Buddhism by him and was just very inspired and ended up following him and training and practicing with him for quite a long time. So it was through who I met,
Yeah, sure.
Rob Nairn, and the big impact, his teaching had, and that's what caused me to get more and more involved in Buddhism in the beginning, and then mindfulness later.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I've heard a lot about Rob Nairn through the Mindfulness Association, and I get from what I've heard, he sounds like he was a very inspiring person. And so was it? I guess it was his teachings that led you towards Buddhism, right?
Yeah, he was a really great communicator, great teacher, and he had a way of really getting to the essence of things. And I think at that time I was quite interested in the uh, Carl Jung and the psychology around Carl Jung, and so was Rob Nairn. So, because he was also linking Carl Jung's approach to the mind with the Buddhist approach to the mind. That was something that originally interested me a lot, and yeah, it was just like, every now and again in life, you meet somebody who's a really great teacher and really hits a spot. And when I went to teachings by him, it really hit the spot,
Yeah. And so could you tell us a bit more about why in particular Tibetan Buddhism is a path that you followed? Because obviously there are lots of different traditions in Buddhism, right? And is Tibetan Buddhism more connected to these kinds of, I guess, psychologies of mind, or was there something else that drew you to Tibetan Buddhism?
I think it is a matter of accident or synchronicity. I just happened to meet Rob, and he was connected to Samye Ling in Scotland. He had originally started off being a Theravada Buddhist practitioner, and then had come to Samye Ling in the late 70s and met Akon Rinpoche, who was the founder. So it was just through the fact that he was connected to Tibetan Buddhism. But I think more than that, Tibetan Buddhism very much works on the idea of transformation, transformation of the mind and transformation of the seemingly dark and difficult energy of the mind and bringing out what's positive and valuable in it, which also links to the idea of Carl Jung, the idea that actually one can really, when one goes deeper into the mind and touches on the archetypes, they can really transform the mind. So there was a kind of link there between the two. And yeah.
Okay, cool. And so the Mindfulness Association, which is an organization that you're a part of, is a great organization, a non-profit and dedicated to helping people to learn more about mindfulness and I guess to transform their own minds. So how did you find? So Rob Nairn set up the Mindfulness Association, right?
He did. He set up the Mindfulness Association together with myself and Heather Regan Addis. We set it up in 2010. Actually, initially, we did it in order to form a partnership with the University of Aberdeen to run the Masters in Mindfulness, which started that year. And Aberdeen University didn't want to form a partnership with a Buddhist organization. So they preferred something more neutral and professional. Therefore, we set up the Mindfulness Association mainly for that reason, actually. But then over the years, it very much gained its own momentum and activity.
Yeah. So I guess in a sense, the Mindfulness Association is a secular way of teaching Buddhist teachings, right?
Yeah, I would say that it is a way of drawing on the wisdom of the Buddhist tradition in an experiential way without dogma and without buying into a belief system. And I would say in particular, the Mindfulness Association draws on Tibetan Buddhism and the richness of Tibetan Buddhism and as our resource. But we try to teach the wisdom there and the principles and the methods without people needing to become Buddhists and buy into it,
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And I guess it's a great way of, because like you say, not needing to buy into it. So some people, if it was purely a Buddhist organization, then it might turn some people away because they might have some I guess personal reasons, or some what's the word, associations that they don't connect with if it's a Buddhist organization. But there are some amazing teachings that can be found there, so it's really useful to reach more people in a way. Yeah, and to me, Buddhism is the most, when it comes to, I guess, religion, Buddhism is probably one of the most least religious the least religious ones, because it's a lot about looking inwards, isn't it, and examining the mind and learning from your own experience. Because don't they say that you should never accept just anything that people tell you? You should explore it for yourself and find the answers within.
I think that is a key teaching in the Dharma in Buddhism, to really not just believe something, but really test it for yourself, certainly. And that's very much a key principle of mindfulness, that actually one's own experience is the most important thing to value, and draw on, not religious texts or etc. But that having been said, Tibetan Buddhism more has the flavor of a religion. It's quite strongly based on faith and devotion, and there's a lot of ritual. So Tibetan Buddhism itself has another dimension to it that could fall more within a religious sort of domain, which is kind of why I think these days people aren't that interested in religion. Religion has definitely fallen from its lofty tower, and even becoming Buddhists, I think some people are not that keen. They just want to be human beings and to live their life with more mindfulness and compassion and wisdom, So therefore, the teachings we offer appeal to them, because they don't have to sort of, wear robes like I am and do all kinds of things, change their name and their lifestyle,
Yeah, sure. And so I've just been reading the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, and I think that's quite a good book to kind of outline. Well, I think it gives a really broad overview of Tibetan Buddhism. And one of the things that they place importance on in the book is having a master and practicing guru yoga. And actually, he goes as far as to say that without having a master, then it's impossible to become enlightened. So what would you think about that? Do you think that's the case?
I don't know if I really agree. For one, I don't know if I've met anybody who's enlightened. Even some of the great Tibetan teachers, some of them look like they are quite highly realized, but I don't know if there are any strict rules in this game. I mean, that's definitely a strong view in Tibetan Buddhism, but if one does have a really good wise, compassionate teacher, it can only but help.
Mm.
But it's not easy to find that kind of person these days, you know.
Yeah.
A lot of the kind of very the great Tibetan teachers that I know of, you know, it's quite hard to have that kind of one-on-one relationship with them because they're just so busy traveling and teaching all over the place.
Mm.
So I don't know if I really agree with that, you know.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. I felt like unless you can move to Tibet and live in a monastery, then how do you find one of these great masters? And does that mean that enlightenment is completely um, off the board for people in the West because we don't really have? It's not like we have loads of masters that we can just turn to and look for help. But yeah, that was just one interesting thing that I was thinking about recently. Another topic, obviously, because it's the book of living and dying, one topic that is really they place a lot of importance on is the contemplation of death and living your life in a way to prepare for your eventual demise. And I think that there's a lot of benefit in doing that, and you're meditating on your own death in a way to overcome the fear of it and to help us to live more fearlessly, maybe. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I think the first thing to say about that is that that's very much based on the paradigm of this is not just one life, but we live many lives. It's based on the reincarnation model, you know. So it's based on the idea that we're not going to waste time in this life because this life is very short. So we want to really put a lot of effort into practice and training the mind because when we die, we don't know where we're going to go. And our actions will then determine whether we have a good rebirth or a rebirth that's not so good. So that it sits within that paradigm of reincarnation. But what I notice in the West is people don't tend to take that seriously. They might take it as an interesting story, you know. But you know, I don't think people really take that to heart. And it's not for me to say whether that's definitely true or not. I tend to incline towards it because I'm a Buddhist. So that's one reason why the meditation on death is so important. But I think also impermanence is a useful thing to think about, you know, because life is fleeting, you know, and days go by quickly, so do weeks, so do years. And I think if one really takes impermanence seriously and the fact that one can die anytime, it actually makes one value the present moment much more because that's all we have. We don't know, we might die tomorrow, you know. So sometimes people feel the meditation on death is a bit depressing, but actually it is really helps us live more fully in the present moment and really choose to be conscious and kind and mindful. Because this is the only moment we really know we're going to have.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think maybe the thing on impermanence isn't enough focused in secular mindfulness. I think it could have a stronger place, actually, than it does at the moment, you know?
Yeah. Do you think that's something that might come up in? So I guess to give anybody background, I know Choden through the course that I'm doing at the moment. So it's the master's degree in mindfulness studies that Choden mentioned, and we'll be coming into a new module which is around insight. So I'm guessing impermanence and topics like that will be something that may feature more strongly in this module. But yeah, so and actually I've got your book here from Mindfulness Insights and meditations to release your habitual thinking and activate your inherent wisdom. So the idea that through meditation and mindfulness, we can bring out this wisdom, which might include things around the nature of reality, such as our impermanent way of being. So yeah, I guess, do you want to say anything else on that topic, whether we can, your experience maybe of insights that have come out through meditation?
Yeah, I mean, that's quite a big one about my insights that have come out through meditation. I don't know quite where to start there, you know. Actually, in fact, Impermanence doesn't really feature that much in the inside module, and it doesn't really feature that much in the trainings we do, maybe as a background, but actually, just based on this interview, I think it should actually come in more, It does come in later when you look at emptiness, which is another big topic in the wisdom module, but perhaps let's not go there right now. Insights that I might have had, can you be more specific? I mean,
maybe we can so just some things that I would like to discuss maybe are around compassion and around suffering, because for me, when practicing compassion and particular compassion-based meditations, I've definitely had the experience of recognizing how much suffering there is in the world. And whereas something, for example, when we've done in the past a safe place meditation, and I've realized that I don't need to visualize a safe space because I was completely safe and completely happy, and the sun was shining and birds were singing outside the window, and I felt so happy at that point and almost overcome with joy, because I realized how lucky I was. But then I realized that I was so lucky because there are many, many more living things on the planet that are nowhere near as lucky, and they're facing extreme suffering. And I ended that meditation session with this sense of sadness, like a lingering sadness. And I think that is how suffering can be realized through compassion practice, I think. And do I have a question here? Well, I think that was a big realization for me, I think. And from that, it's kind of helped me to realize what I wanted to do with my life, which is to alleviate suffering. But I have had moments since then, like quite recently, I was on holiday and I was just like thinking about suffering and I was kind of overcome with just the thought of how much suffering there is in the world. Like it's almost limitless. And I think most of the time I don't feel like that, but it was on the odd occasion when I feel like I can think about it too much. And I feel like there's nothing that can be done because there's so much suffering that it's almost futile. And yeah, so any advice on that?
Yeah, I mean, suffering is a really big one. And you're right, like once you start opening your heart and mind to the suffering in life, there is so much suffering that one can end up feeling maybe a bit forlorn. That's, I in my experience, it's always good to start at home, start with oneself and start to really build up one's own resources, feeling safe, take care of oneself, look after one's own needs. Just like you might look after one's body, look after the mind in a similar way, I think it's really good to start there and then to start with one's immediate kind of family, like really, looking out for one's partner, children, parents. I think the idea is to gradually expand the circle of loving kindness and compassion depending on our resources, and try to be realistic and just start with oneself and one's family and move out more and more the people you work with, people you share your life with, and see if one can somehow let this sort of suffering of people touch one. Some people often shut it out, and because actually that can enliven the heart, and just do small things that can make a difference, and then kind of go out from there in small ways, maybe with a wish that finally one day one can be much more helpful and be much more effective. But I think trying to be realistic, and working in small ways. And I think sometimes it might not be that useful to just watch certain TV programs which are just focused on like the Ukraine war or things we can't do anything about, because then in a way it's affecting us, but we don't have the resources to deal with it, So I think that's a kind of realistic approach,
Yeah, yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
because if we focus on helping the people who need help in our local community, then we can
Mm,
actually make a difference and we can actually do something about suffering that exists. But of course, it's impossible for us to solve all of the suffering in the world.
mm.
So yeah, if we focus on something that we can do, then yeah, I guess we can do something at least, and we can feel good about it.
Yeah, there's a Tibetan Buddhist phrase which is have your vision as vast as the sky, which knows no limit. So I wish that I could relieve all beings from suffering. So it's a big vision, but have your actions as fine as a grain of sand. So your actual actions are really much to do with the detail of one's immediate life and the people you're with and what you can do. So have the big vision, but keep the action very grounded and realistic according to what one actually can do, like the local community, really helping there and see if one can then move beyond the local community, something like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes sense. Okay, cool, great. So compassion practice is. I feel like compassion practice is just as important as mindfulness practice, and I feel like they're two really big, maybe parts of the same thing, really. Because without compassion, I feel like mindfulness is maybe maybe a bit empty, maybe
Mm,
or a bit cold, or um, doesn't lead to feelings of purpose. Um, and that's why I really like the way that the course is structured. And I feel like before I started, I didn't really give much thought into why the course is structured the way it is. But now I feel like it makes perfect sense, because I feel like you have to start with mindfulness, and then you can you can start paying attention to your own internal workings, and when you start doing that, you have to add self-compassion, because it can be a scary place looking inwards, I
mm,
think. um, and and it can be difficult as well. So I think without self-compassion, it might not go that well, because it can be hard to deal with, and people can be hard on themselves, right? uh,
mm,
and then insight, which is the next module following mindfulness, compassion, then insight. And I feel like once you start practicing mindfulness and compassion, then insights start to come.
mm.
Is that so? That's how I've perceived it now that we've kind of started working our way through it. Have I kind of hit the mark there, or is there anything else to it that I've missed?
Yeah, I think you're a pretty good student. You seem to be like really. You definitely sort of, I think, have understood it well. I think, as you say, mindfulness is important to start with. It's like the foundation, because with mindfulness, you're recognizing that our mind or our attention is all over the place. So we need to sort of start reining our attention in, or start training our mind to just focus on one thing. So that is really important to start with. But I think it can also be good, even before mindfulness, starting with mindfulness, to have a basic compassionate motivation that the reason why we do this is to benefit self and others.
Yeah.
So in Buddhism, you always would start off with a basic compassionate orientational motivation, and then you would practice mindfulness as a way of training the mind. And then once we have started working with mindfulness, as you say, you start to notice all kinds of things about oneself that are quite difficult. It's like putting a light on in a darkened room, the light of mindfulness. And then you see all these kinds of messy things lying in the corners you hadn't seen before. So then it's really important that we bring in the self-compassion, which is a bit like the warm light.
Mm.
Because you don't want to shine a really cold neon light on all the things in the room of the mind and end up being more self-critical, which really
Mm.
wouldn't help. So we really need that kind of warm light of self-compassion to really become aware of these things and start to sort of have kindness, take care of these parts of ourselves.
Mm.
And when these two are operating together, when there's the mindfulness, that the light of awareness is revealing more and more, and there's kindness and there's acceptance, then insight can arise, as to what's going on. But you need both. You need the mindful awareness and you need the self-kindness. And then one can start to realize things about oneself one never saw before, which can be very liberating.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. And I've noticed that as well in the groups that we practice in. Um, things bubble up, I think. And so especially when we got to the compassion practices, it was just very emotional for a lot of people. Because I guess practicing self-compassion, it can just bring things up. And so, like you say, we can have these things lying in the corner that we're kind of unaware of, or that we've pushed into the back of our minds, things deep down within us, which even from childhood, or and we've repressed them, I guess, sometimes. But it's about letting them come up and then approaching it with compassion. And it can be very emotional. But I think in a way it helps to clear stuff, and it can help us be more aware of what's going on within us.
Yeah, and also many people, when they start giving themselves a bit of kindness, they also begin to realize how cruel they've been to themselves and how critical for so long, and how they've shut the door on their own hearts, some people are very good at being kind to other people, but they're not so good at being kind to themselves. And sometimes when they really realize how cruel and critical they've been on themselves for so long, often then it can be very difficult, because it's like there's a lot of sadness. Like, I've become my own worst enemy instead of my own best friend. And how sad, really, because we can't avoid ourselves. So if we're really unkind to ourselves, it's a very painful thing. And it's a very hard for people to first face that fact, when they first become kind, bring kindness to themselves. So that's why there can be tears, people can cry, people can feel really, there can be a sadness there, and maybe the sadness is part of the genuine compassion. In Buddhism, they say sadness and compassion are linked, that sometimes when you really tap into your own sadness about yourself and the world, compassion comes out of that,
Yeah. And so bodhicitta, right? That's the sadness in the heart that's awakened through mindfulness and compassion, and it helps you to realize that what you want to do is to alleviate suffering. So I guess maybe it's the first step. Like, you have to have that sadness, and maybe to realize when you have that sadness, it helps you to recognize sadness in others. Maybe that's what it takes to recognize suffering. Maybe.
Yeah, I think so. I'm just trying to think of this thing with sadness, like there's a kind of Tibetan story of a deity called Chenrezig who made a wish to alleviate all the suffering of sentient beings, in the Tibetan tradition. And when he first looked out on the suffering of life, he just wept continuously, and but those tears actually became like the thing that really motivated him to make a difference. It really touched his heart, And so in a way, sadness is what touches the heart, and we're not numb to life. We're not numb to the pain of things. It touches us. And then out of that, there comes the bodhicitta. I really want to make a difference in this life, I want to have a big view, but also be realistic and do what I can. But I want to not turn away from suffering. I want to let it touch me, and we also begin to realize that when we let the suffering of life touch us, it doesn't actually damage us. It can enliven us, It can really awaken the heart. And I think that's quite a big thing in the practice of compassion.
Yeah. So when it comes to the Mindfulness Association, you have courses on, because anybody can come along and take a course with the Mindfulness Association, right?
They can, yes, yeah.
And do you want to say a bit about what's available? You have, because you don't have to do a master's degree. You can do smaller courses and things, right?
Yeah, so we got two kind of training routes. The one is through two universities now, University of Aberdeen and the University of West Scotland. Or alternatively, the Mindfulness Association runs experiential courses. So level 1 would be a training in mindfulness over, say, 4 weekends. And then after that, there'll be a training in compassion over 3 weekends or a weekend and a retreat. And then a training in insight, similarly, 3 weekends or a weekend and retreat. And then we've also developed a wisdom module too now, which kind of comes after the insight module. So it's a kind of progressive training, step by step, first in mindfulness and in compassion, then in insight, and then the final one is wisdom.
Okay, so what's the differentiation between insight and wisdom? I guess insight are kind of like individual insights that come up, and then wisdom is, what is that, more like a broader, maybe you can explain.
Yeah, I think insight is more insight into our habitual patterning, because I think with meditation, the deeper work is coming to recognize the habitual patterns that often govern how we live and how we think. And many people never see these patterns. They're just under their power. So part of the insight is to really begin to recognize the habitual patterning that, that can dictate how we live, like a lot of people have habitual patterns of lack of self-worth or strong self-criticism or striving endlessly without remission, So the insight operates more on that, and we have a key principle which is called the seeing is the doing. When you really see these patterns clearly, they lose their power, The wisdom module is maybe going much deeper to the notion of Buddha nature. So it draws on Buddhist teachings that there's a part of us that always was free and whole and at peace. There's a part of us within us that is like that, but many people never touch that in their life, So the wisdom module is more about how can we come home to that part of ourselves that was always free, always whole, always at peace, and maybe covered over by many things, But the insight there goes deeper into Buddha nature, or in Buddhism called nature and mind. But in order to get to that place, one needs to have done all the others first, the mindfulness, compassion, and insight.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so, and Buddha nature, am I right in saying that is also used as a synonym for enlightenment?
It is in a way. I mean, Buddha nature is, I suppose what it's saying is we all Buddhas without realizing it, Somebody who's enlightened has awakened the Buddha nature. It's fully manifest. Whereas everybody else has got that same nature, but they haven't actualized it yet, Often an image is used of a candle. We all have a candle, unlit candle in the heart, which symbolizes the Buddha nature we all have, But some people have lit the candle in the heart, and they've actualized that nature. So that's the difference between somebody who's enlightened, they lit the candle, somebody who isn't, the candle's unlit, but they still got it,
Yeah.
And, once you've lit the candle in your heart, then you can help light other people's candles that are not lit. So that's a kind of useful image to understand the meaning of Buddha nature,
Yeah. Here's an interesting question. Once you've lit it, can it be blown out?
Okay. I think maybe in the early stages, you light it and it goes out, and you light it again and it goes out, and you light it again and it goes out. And then after a while, it just stays lit, And then the light gets stronger and stronger,
Yeah. And that's the need for practice, I guess, right?
Yeah. So definitely, that's a need for practice, yeah.
Yeah. And also, and because I know you mentioned Tibetan Buddhism is kind of more heavy on the ritual side of things and ceremonies. And lately, I've been feeling like maybe I should add a bit more ritual to my life. I guess even just as a as a reminder, or a reminder to practice gratitude, and that kind of thing. What do you think? Do you have any rituals that you follow?
I think all of us have rituals. We all have rituals in terms of little things we do, even to sort of the way we make tea, or the way we organize our room, or people in couples can have little rituals of how they interact with each other. I think human beings always operating in terms of ritual. So I think to develop conscious rituals that are about cultivating sort of awareness and compassion and wisdom, I think is very valuable. So, like say in Tibetan Buddhism, there's a lot of ritual, but they're kind of pre-formulated, from the past. Like doing practices involving chanting and visualization. So they sort of pre-formed rituals that one uses, but that's one way of doing it. But one can come up with one's own kind of rituals, like around gratitude, which could be choosing to go and sit by a river every evening and really appreciate what's there, take the time out. I don't know, I can't quite think right now, but you could create all kinds of little meaningful rituals that give us space to go more deep and touch something that we don't normally touch in everyday life. That's the meaning of ritual, to sort of touch something in ourselves we don't touch in the everyday stresses of life. So you need to create a bit of boundary around one's activity to go more deeply. I think that's the meaning of ritual.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I'm gonna think about what rituals I can start doing.
Yeah, I think for many people, smoking a cigarette, is a little ritual. And maybe it's a kind of ritual for, I don't know what, I don't smoke cigarettes, but, going outside in a particular place and smoking a cigarette could be a particular kind of ritual to de-stress or something, But maybe then trying to create really more wholesome rituals that could be a useful thing.
Yeah. I was thinking maybe light some incense.
Yeah, light some incense.
And then while it's burning, take that time to think about what I'm grateful for, or that kind of thing.
Great ritual. That's a great ritual, actually. Yeah.
Maybe just do that once a day, either in the morning or the evening, maybe. Yeah. Yeah, great. Well, I think I've run out of questions for you. Do you have anything else you'd like to say before we finish?
Yeah, I mean, I think the practice of mindfulness is such an important thing, to really pay attention to what we feed in terms of our thoughts, pay attention to how we speak, pay attention to how we act, And I think that's such a valuable thing in this life, And it's a bit like, if the mind is a garden, we become a very skilled gardener. We don't just let weeds grow willy-nilly, which is like all kinds of different negative thought patterns. We actually really take care of the garden of the mind. We really choose to plant the kind of things that bring beauty, that bring joy, or things that bring sustenance, like, vegetables, like having a little vegetable patch. So I think to really, we're always in our mind, we can't escape it. So I think to really bring awareness to the mind and really be very attentive to what we feed and what we cultivate in the mind is so important,
Yeah.
I think that's such an important thing for everybody, whether they choose to call themselves a Buddhist or not, or whatever religion, it comes down to how we relate to our own mind, If we have a bad relationship with our own mind, it's going to be very hard to have good relationships with other people and colleagues and the environment. But if we can start to cultivate a good relationship with ourselves and see the mind as a garden that we really want to take care of, then I think there is so much possibility for flourishing and happiness in this life, you know?
Yeah, definitely. It's really interesting that you use that analogy, because before we created Medito, I was talking to Roma, who's one of the co-founders, and we were thinking about creating something that was I've even got a folder on my computer now called Mind Garden, because that was an original idea that never came into fruition, and it was all about planting these seeds that would then grow into plants and trees, and that was, and you planted a seed by practicing meditation. Yeah, so I think that's a great analogy, and yeah, we've all got to tend to our own mind gardens.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah.
Well, thank you again for taking the time. It's been really interesting talking to you, and I'll see you again in September in Samye Ling. I'll be there.
Great. Look forward to seeing you, Stephen. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much.
Okay, wishing you well, and wishing all the viewers well who are watching this and listening.
Yeah,
May
you
you
too.
be well, may you be happy.